Today, I'm going to tell a story you think you know, but you don't. The story of the 300 Spartans. The story of Thermopylae. You've seen the movie. You know the legend. A tiny band of superhuman Spartan warriors, led by the fearless King Leonidas, stands for 3 days against the overwhelming million-man army of the Persian god-king, Xerxes. They fight to the last man, sacrificing themselves for the glory of Sparta and the future of Greece. It's a story of ultimate sacrifice, of a glorious death. But what if I told you that the most incredible part of that story isn't how they died? What if the real, untold story is about how most of them didn't? What if the legend of the 300 is, in fact, history's most successful and forgotten escape mission? This is the story of the other Thermopylae, the one not of a glorious end, but of a desperate, bloody, and brilliant fight for life. Our story begins not with 300, but with over 7,000. The Greek coalition that marched to the hot gates, the Thermopylae, was a diverse force. There were Spartans, yes, 300 of the king's personal bodyguards, chosen men with living sons to carry on their name. But there were also 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, and thousands of others from city-states like Corinth, Arcadia, and Phocis. Their mission was simple: bottle up the massive Persian army in the narrow coastal pass, where its numbers meant nothing. For 2 days they held. The Persians threw their best infantry, the immortals, at the Greek phalanx, a wall of bronze and shields. The Greeks, with their superior armor, longer spears, and disciplined formation, cut them down. The pass was choked with Persian dead. It was a slaughter. But on the second evening, the trap was sprung. A local Greek trader, Ephialtes, revealed to Xerxes a hidden mountain path that led behind the Greek lines. The Phocian troops guarding this path were outflanked and routed. The news was brought to Leonidas. The Persians would soon surround them completely. They were in the tight place, the Sphacteria, as the Spartans would call a hopeless situation. It is at this moment that the myth and history violently diverge. The Hollywood version shows Leonidas dismissing the other Greeks, choosing to stay with his 300 for a suicide mission of glory. But the historical record, primarily from Herodotus, tells a different, far more strategic story. Leonidas called a pre-dawn council of war. The situation was dire, but not yet fatal. The Persian encircling force, led by Hydarnes, was still hours away. Leonidas made a crucial, logical, and devastating decision. He ordered the majority of the Greek army to retreat. Now, his reasoning was cold, hard military logic. The alliance was shattered. To stay was to be annihilated for no strategic gain. The war for Greece was just beginning, and these men were needed to fight another day at the Isthmus of Corinth and at Salamis. The sacrifice of the entire force would be a catastrophic waste, but a complete retreat under the nose of the enemy is a recipe for a rout. If the Persians realized the Greeks were fleeing and charged, the retreat would turn into a massacre, and no one would escape. Someone had to stay. Someone had to form a rear guard, a living shield, to hold the pass long enough for the army to get away. This was not a suicide mission born of pride. It was a tactical rearguard action born of necessity. So, who stayed? Leonidas and his 300 Spartans would form the core of this rearguard. They were the best, the most disciplined, but they were not alone. The 700 men from Thespians, under their general Thermopylae, made a conscious, stunning choice. They refused the order to retreat. Their city was right in the path of the Persian army. They knew that by staying, they were signing the death warrant for their entire hoplite force, the pride of their polis. But they understood the stakes were bigger than Thespians. They stood with Leonidas. Then there were the 400 Thespians. Herodotus, who had a strong Athenian bias against Thebes, claims they were kept as hostages, unwilling participants. But later historians suggest it's more likely that at least a contingent of their hoplites, the elite fighters, also chose to stay as part of the rearguard. So, the final stand was not 300 men. It was at least 1,400 300 Spartans and 700 Thespians, plus the Thebans and a few Helots, Spartan serfs, who remained. This was the rearguard. Their mission, to sell their lives as dearly as possible, to buy time with their blood. As the sun rose on the third day, the main Greek force was already on the move, hurrying south to safety. Behind them, the sound of battle began anew. The rearguard did not wait to be trapped. In a final, shocking act of aggression, Leonidas led his men out of the narrowest part of the pass and into a wider area. He knew he was going to die. His goal now was to kill as many Persians as possible and to find Xerxes. The fighting was frenzied, chaotic. The Greeks knew they had minutes, maybe an hour. They fought with the reckless fury of doomed men. They broke their spears on Persian shields and drew their swords. It was in this melee that King Leonidas fell, struck down by Persian missiles. A ferocious battle erupted over his body. The Spartans and Thespians drove the Persians back 4 times, recovering their king's corpse. It was then that the trap closed. Hydarnes and his immortals completed their flanking maneuver and arrived behind the rearguard. The announcement was made. The Greeks were completely surrounded. The surviving defenders, perhaps a few hundred by now, were forced back from the main battlefield onto a small hillock, a last piece of high ground. It was here, surrounded, with their shields shattered and their spears broken, that they made their final stand. They fought with their swords, then with their hands and teeth. The Persians, terrified of these lethal demons, finally held back and annihilated them with a storm of arrows and javelins, until not a man was left standing. The rearguard had been utterly destroyed, but they had succeeded. While that final, bloody drama unfolded on the hillock, another was taking place just a few hundred yards away. The story we almost never hear, the retreat of the main army, was not a calm, orderly walk in the park. It was a desperate, chaotic, and dangerous fighting withdrawal. The Persian army was pressing hard from the front, while the rearguard engaged the main Persian force. Other Persian units, especially cavalry, would have been probing, trying to flank and harry the retreating Greeks. This is where the other heroes of Thermopylae emerge, the other Peloponnesian forces. The Corinthians, Arcadians, and others didn't just run. They had to form their own mobile defensive lines, fighting a series of small, brutal holding actions against Persian skirmishers to keep the escape route open. It was a running battle. Men would turn, form a shield wall to hold back a Persian assault, then disengage and run to the next defensible position. It was a nightmare of dust, blood, and shouting. The discipline of the Greek hoplite was tested to its absolute limit. To turn your back and run while your brothers are being slaughtered behind you is one of the hardest things a soldier can do. But it was what Leonidas had ordered. It was their duty to survive. The Thespians, who had left earlier, according to some accounts, faced a different challenge. As they tried to withdraw, they found their path contested. They had to fight their way through advancing Persian troops, likely taking heavy casualties before they could break through to safety. The success of this mass escape was a monumental military achievement. From a force of over 7,000, the Greeks lost around 2,000 minus 4,000 men, the majority of whom were the rearguard. This means that over 3,000 Greek soldiers, experienced, battle-hardened hoplites, escaped the trap. They lived to fight another day. The story of Thermopylae was immediately mythologized. The Spartans, masters of propaganda, carved an epitaph on a stone at the pass. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. It was perfect. It spoke of duty, sacrifice, and unwavering obedience. It erased the messy, complicated truth of a tactical retreat and focused solely on the glory of the fallen. The Thespians, who had made an equal sacrifice, were largely forgotten by popular history. The successful escape of the army was an inconvenient footnote to the powerful narrative of the heroic last stand. But those 3,000 ghosts who escaped were the real victory. Months later, at the Battle of Plataea, the final decisive land battle of the Greco-Persian Wars, the Greek army that stood against the Persians was led by Pausanias, a Spartan regent, and fighting in that army were the veterans of Thermopylae. Not just the memory of the 300, but the living, breathing men who had been there. The Corinthians, the Arcadians, the Thespians who had fought in the pass and lived to tell the tale. They knew the Persian way of war. They had seen the face of the enemy. They were not afraid. The rearguard's sacrifice at Thermopylae was not in vain. It was the ultimate success. They saved an army. That army, in turn, saved Greece. So, the next time someone tells you the story of the 300 Spartans who died, remember the other story. Remember the 700 Thespians who chose to die with them. and remember the 3,000 Greeks who lived because of them. It's a story not just of a beautiful death, but of an ugly, desperate, and brilliant fight for life. It is the story of history's most successful escape.